Walk into almost any modern kitchen and ask someone how they'd preserve food without electricity. Most people give the same answer. I'd buy a dehydrator. It's a logical response. Modern dehydrators are convenient, they're reliable, and they produce consistent results. But long before electricity reached rural homes, people had already been preserving food for centuries, including many Amish communities today. While practices vary between Amish communities, many continue to rely on traditional preservation methods alongside modern ones where their customs allow. Air drying, shade drying, hanging foods in well-ventilated barns, using screened drying racks, taking advantage of warm, dry weather. These methods aren't faster. They're certainly not easier, but they prove something fascinating. Electricity isn't always the requirement people think it is. The real requirements are airflow, low humidity, patience, and understanding which foods actually respond well to natural drying. That's the important part, because not every food dries successfully. Some become unsafe. Some spoil before they dry. Others become surprisingly useful once enough moisture has been removed. And those are the foods we're looking at today. Let's begin with one of the oldest preserved foods in the world: apples. Long before refrigerators existed, apples were often sliced into thin rings and dried naturally during suitable weather. There's a simple reason. Fresh apples don't last forever. Even varieties known for storing well eventually soften, bruise, or spoil. Drying changes that equation. As moisture leaves the fruit, the slices become lighter, sweeter, chewier, and much easier to store. The interesting thing is that drying doesn't magically preserve apples. Removing moisture slows the growth of microorganisms that need water to thrive. That's why thin slices matter. Airflow matters. And completely drying the fruit matters. People often assume dried apples were created because people wanted snacks. Historically, they were much more practical than that. They provided fruit long after fresh harvest season ended. That's valuable. Today, they still work exactly the same way. The second food is peaches. Peaches are wonderful. They're also fragile. A fresh peach has a surprisingly short window before quality begins declining. That's one reason drying became popular. Sliced peaches can be dried naturally in suitable conditions with good airflow and protection from insects. The result is completely different from fresh fruit. The texture changes. The flavor becomes much more concentrated. Natural sugars become more noticeable. People often describe dried peaches as tasting sweeter than fresh ones, even though no sugar has been added. That's because removing water concentrates the flavors already present. It's one of nature's simplest tricks. Less water, more flavor. The third food is pears. Pears have been dried for generations across many cultures, including in some Amish households. Unlike apples, pears often need careful timing. Too ripe, and they're difficult to slice cleanly. Too unripe, and flavor suffers. Finding that balance makes a remarkable difference. Once dried, pears become surprisingly versatile. They're eaten as snacks, added to baked goods, mixed with other dried fruit, or simply stored until needed. Again, the lesson isn't about avoiding electricity. It's about understanding the food itself. The fourth food is plums. Once dried, most people know them by another name: prunes. Many people don't even realize prunes begin as ordinary plums. Drying simply transforms them. Water leaves. Natural sugars concentrate. Storage life improves dramatically. This transformation has been appreciated for centuries because plums often produce abundant harvests over a short period. Drying allowed families to preserve far more of that harvest instead of watching it spoil. That's one recurring theme you'll notice throughout this list. Drying wasn't originally about convenience. It was about preventing waste. The fifth food is grapes. Another familiar dried food hiding in plain sight. Raisins. People buy raisins every week without thinking much about how they're made. Yet drying grapes is one of the oldest food preservation methods ever practiced. Fresh grapes contain significant amounts of water. Remove much of that moisture and something interesting happens. The grapes shrink dramatically, but the sweetness becomes much more noticeable. They're easier to transport, easier to store, and they remain useful long after fresh grapes disappear. That's why raisins continue appearing in kitchens around the world. Not because they're fashionable, because they solved a practical problem long before supermarkets existed. The sixth food is herbs. This category deserves far more attention than it usually receives. Parsley, thyme, sage, mint, rosemary, oregano. Many herbs naturally lend themselves to air drying. In fact, hanging small bundles upside down in a dry, well-ventilated place has been common practice in many cultures for generations. This isn't just about preservation. It's also about flavor. Fresh herbs eventually wilt. Dried herbs continue adding flavor long after the growing season has ended. People often underestimate how much value herbs provide. A pinch of rosemary transforms potatoes. A little oregano transforms tomato sauce. Mint creates tea. Parsley brightens soups. Small ingredients often create the biggest improvements. That's why dried herbs remain one of the simplest and most practical forms of food preservation. The seventh food is hot peppers. Walk into many traditional gardens, and you'll often see peppers hanging together in bunches. There's a reason. Many thinner-skinned pepper varieties dry exceptionally well when conditions are suitable. As they dry, their heat often feels more concentrated because the moisture disappears while the compounds responsible for their heat remain. The result is lightweight, easy to store, easy to crush into flakes or powder later. Again, electricity isn't the important part. Airflow is. Keeping moisture moving away from the peppers is what allows the process to succeed. The eighth food is mushrooms. Now this one requires a little more care. Not every mushroom should be dried. And wild mushrooms should only ever be collected by people with the knowledge to identify them safely. But edible cultivated mushrooms have been dried in many cultures for centuries. As moisture leaves, their texture changes dramatically. Then something fascinating happens. When rehydrated later, much of their rich flavor returns. That's one reason dried mushrooms remain so popular in soups and stews. They're compact, lightweight, and full of concentrated flavor. The ninth food is onions. Fresh onions already store fairly well. So why dry them? Because dried onions solve different problems. They're lightweight, take up very little space, can be chopped before drying, and become incredibly convenient later. Add them to soups, sauces, stews, or crush them into flakes. Many people buy dried onions without realizing how simple the idea really is. It's simply moisture removed from one of the world's most common vegetables. The 10th food is garlic. Like onions, garlic has excellent natural storage compared to many vegetables. But drying extends its usefulness even further. Thin slices dry more evenly. Later they can be stored whole, crushed into flakes, or ground into powder. The remarkable thing about garlic is how little is needed to change an entire meal. That's why preserving it made sense long before modern kitchens existed. One bulb could quietly improve dozens of future meals. And that's exactly why people took the time to preserve it. We've only reached the halfway point. Because the next 10 foods include some of the most surprising examples of traditional drying methods. Some of them are foods people never imagined could be preserved without plugging in a single appliance. At this point, one thing has probably become obvious. Drying food was never about making life easier. In many ways, it made life harder. Fruit had to be sliced. Herbs had to be gathered. Drying racks had to be prepared. Food had to be protected from insects, moisture, and unexpected weather. It required attention, patience, experience. So why did people continue doing it? Because once the work was finished, they had something incredibly valuable. Food that weighed less, took up less space, and could often be enjoyed months later when fresh produce was no longer available. That's why traditional food preservation survived for so long. Not because it was simple, because it worked. The next food is green beans. Fresh green beans have a frustrating habit. One week, they're perfect. The next, they're soft. Then suddenly, they're no longer worth keeping. Long before freezers became common, some families solved that problem by drying them. You may even hear older generations refer to leather breeches, a traditional Appalachian method of stringing and drying green beans. While this practice is associated more with Appalachia than specifically with the Amish, it shows how widespread air-drying techniques once were. The beans would gradually lose moisture while hanging in a dry, well-ventilated place. Later, they could be rehydrated and cooked. They weren't identical to fresh beans. That wasn't the goal. The goal was having vegetables available long after harvest season had ended. That's a theme you'll notice again and again. Preservation isn't about making food exactly the same. It's about making sure food is still available. The 12th food is sweet corn. This surprises many people. Fresh corn contains a lot of water, but kernels removed from the cob can be dried under suitable conditions. Historically, many cultures preserved corn this way because it reduced waste after harvest. Later, the dried kernels could be soaked and cooked, ground into meal, or used in soups and stews. Again, the process wasn't fast. Nature rarely is. But it allowed food harvested during one season to continue feeding people much later. That's practical thinking. Not wasting abundance when it's available. Preparing for the months when it isn't. The 13th food is tomatoes. Most viewers think of canned tomatoes. Yet tomatoes can also be dried. Thin slices, halves, or smaller varieties dried whole in suitable climates. As water leaves the tomato, something remarkable happens. The flavor becomes incredibly concentrated. Sweetness increases. Acidity becomes more noticeable. That's why dried tomatoes taste so different from fresh ones. People often describe them as completely different foods. In a way, they are. Removing moisture changes texture, flavor, and how the food is used. That's why dried tomatoes often appear in breads, pasta dishes, salads, and sauces. A little goes a surprisingly long way. The 14th food is pumpkin. Fresh pumpkin is already known for storing well under the right conditions, but slices of pumpkin can also be dried. Historically, this provided another way to preserve a large harvest. Large pumpkins produce a tremendous amount of food, sometimes more than a family could eat before spoilage became a concern. Drying solved that problem. Instead of wasting part of the harvest, families preserved more of it. That's one of the smartest lessons traditional food preservation teaches us. When nature provides abundance, think beyond today. Think about next month. Think about next season. The 15th food is squash. Like pumpkin, many squash varieties can be sliced and dried. Again, proper drying conditions matter. Good airflow, protection from insects, low humidity. The finished product becomes much lighter than fresh squash. Later, it can be rehydrated and used in cooking. People often think traditional food preservation only focused on fruit. Vegetables were equally important, because preserving vegetables meant preserving variety. Without them, winter meals became much more repetitive. The 16th food is peas. Fresh peas have a very short season. That's one reason drying became so useful. Properly dried peas became compact, easy to store, easy to transport, and later they could become soups, stews, and countless everyday meals. The interesting thing about peas is that they remind us preservation wasn't always about snacks. It was about ingredients. Ingredients that quietly supported meal after meal. The 17th food is beans. Not canned beans. Fresh beans harvested from the garden. Many bean varieties naturally dry on the plant as they mature. After harvesting and further drying if necessary, they become one of the longest storing pantry staples available. This may be one of the oldest food preservation methods in history. No electricity, no complicated equipment, just patience. Today, dried beans remain one of the most practical pantry foods anywhere in the world. Not because they're fashionable, because they continue proving their value generation after generation. The 18th food is mushrooms. We've already talked about cultivated mushrooms, but it's worth mentioning another lesson. Drying doesn't improve poor quality food. It preserves good quality food. That's an important distinction. Food should always be fresh and suitable before preservation begins. Traditional preservation methods were never shortcuts for spoiled food. They were ways of protecting perfectly good food from becoming spoiled. That principle remains just as true today. The 19th food is mint and other tea herbs. Many Amish households are known for growing herbs, although practices differ between communities. Drying mint, lemon balm, chamomile, or other suitable herbs create something remarkably simple. Tea. Long before supermarkets sold hundreds of tea varieties, people often gathered what grew around them. Once dried, those herbs could be enjoyed months later. Again, it's a reminder that preservation wasn't only about calories, it was also about comfort. A warm cup of herbal tea on a cold evening has always meant more than simply drinking water. The 20th and final food is one almost everyone has seen: sunflower seeds. Once mature and properly dried, they become another food capable of storing far longer than people often expect. They're compact, nutritious, easy to transport, easy to eat, easy to use in baking, or simply enjoyed as they are. Like so many foods on this list, their strength comes from simplicity. Nature already did most of the work. People simply finished the process. Now step back and look at everything we've covered. Apples, peaches, pears, plums, grapes, herbs, peppers, mushrooms, onions, garlic, green beans, corn, tomatoes, pumpkin, squash, peas, beans, tea herbs, sunflower seeds. Notice something? Almost none of these foods required electricity to begin with. Electric dehydrators simply made an old process faster and more predictable. They didn't invent drying. People had already spent centuries learning how air, warmth, sunlight, and patience could preserve food. That's an important distinction. Modern technology improved efficiency. Traditional knowledge discovered the technique. There's another lesson hidden inside this list. Traditional food preservation wasn't driven by trends. It wasn't driven by social media. It wasn't driven by expensive equipment. It was driven by necessity. If fruit ripened all at once, families found ways to preserve it. If herbs were abundant, they dried them. If vegetables couldn't all be eaten fresh, they looked for practical solutions. Waste wasn't an option. That mindset may be one of the most valuable lessons these traditions still offer today. Use what you have. Protect what you've grown. Avoid unnecessary waste. Think ahead. Because whether someone uses a modern dehydrator or relies on traditional air drying methods, the goal remains exactly the same. Making good food last longer. Not forever. just long enough to bridge the gap between one harvest and the next. And perhaps that's the most fascinating part of all. The methods may have changed. The equipment may have changed. But the reason people preserve food has stayed almost exactly the same for generations: to make the most of what they have. And that's a lesson that never really goes out of date.